Hey guys, Insightful here, and by popular request, we're going to be going over the Sol airdrop like looping strategies essentially. So to kind of set the context here, recently Jito did an airdrop, and you basically, the snapshot was November 25th. You needed about 100 points. So if you held or minted one Sol worth of Jito, just Jito Sol, which is our liquid staking derivative of Sol, basically with like one or two Sol worth of, if you put that in a DeFi or DApp protocol for about 50 days, you were able to hit the minimum threshold, which is around 5,000 Jito tokens, so $10,000 to $15,000. So obviously that's extremely lucrative, and this kind of sent a frenzy around Sol airdrop farming in the whole space. The reason that was kind of so lucrative was partly because it was so underfarmed. We're going to be kind of looking at strategies, and we're going to be kind of combining MarginFi and Camino as well, and then probably looping that into Meteora and Saga as well. So just to show you kind of how lending and borrowing works, because it is kind of confusing for the first time for people who don't use it. And yeah, so that's basically the short overview. So how do you get your funds on Solana, right? Generally, you want to be using Wormhole. The reason for that is because Wormhole received a large amount of funding, around 300 million, 285 million in funding, $2.5 billion valuation, which was comparable to Layer Zero, so very large. They have noted that there will be a token airdrop. Sorry, there will be a token called Hole, but it's not clear if they're going to airdrop, but there's no reason you shouldn't be using Wormhole because it is kind of one of the better bridges to Solana anyway, and you can kind of passively get it. The problem is that using the Wormhole UI is very painful and not great because sometimes you get certain assets bridged to Wormhole that you have to only convert on certain dexes and whatnot, and usually you have to like look into the docs to see, okay, I have this asset, now I need to go to this DEX to be able to swap it into it. So we're going to be using other alternatives such as Mine Finance and Allbridge Core, which use the Wormhole infrastructure as well and are both tokenless. I'm not sure about the token probabilities for Allbridge, but MineSwap has a decent chance of dropping as well. So if you're using Mine, you're potentially farming Mine and Wormhole as well. So in terms of bridging over, I would completely avoid it bridging from Ethereum mainnet just because it's expensive now. And as you can see here, I guess you can't see the UI overview here, but gas is around 30 to 45 GOI on average now. We don't have that kind of average 5 GOI like in last summer that we had. So I would avoid ETH completely. You can bridge from Arbitrum, AVAX, or Binance Smart Chain. Then you can bridge directly into Sol on Solana itself. So I would do that just so you have gas initially there, and then the rest you can bridge over with stablecoins. On Allbridge, it's a similar story. You can only bridge stablecoins from Allbridge. Well, that's just something to note. In my experience, it's kind of easier to just bridge over USDC in general. If you are bridging from Arbitrum, it's important to note that there are two types of USDC. There's USDC and then USDC.E. So if you're not seeing USDC kind of pop up on Allbridge or Mayan, you might have the wrong type of USDC that you might need to swap, and you can swap using a token like an aggregator like Odos, which is also tokenless, so you should be passively using that as well. If you bridge from Arbitrum, it's going to take about 20 minutes as well. If you bridge from Avalanche, it's only going to take about 2 minutes. So that's something to note as well. I haven't bridged a ton from Binance Smart Chain, so I can't really comment on that. But yeah, generally for the first transactions, you want to bridge into Sol using Mayan, so you have some gas. And then for the next transactions, you can bridge over stablecoins. Usually USDC is a decent option, using from wherever you want to bridge. So that's how you get funds kind of onto Sol without having to use the terrible portal or Wormhole UI while potentially farming multiple protocols at once. All right, so let's actually get started here. So I'm going to be doing this with a burner wallet just to show you how it works. Basically, I'm just going to be using 100 USDT or stablecoin to start. You can obviously, extrapolate this and use it with different amounts like 500, 250, 1,000, whatever. How much, are you going to need is probably going to be a common question. I would say, because of the, the frenzy recently, the competition is going to be a lot higher and more diluted. So I would say try to at least park $250 to $500 for at least 1 month, ideally 2+ months. Because you're going to see here that just because if you deposit 250, you're not actually going to be able to borrow a full 250 as well to be able to loop it into other stuff. And we'll get into that as well. So there's a potential to use reference links as well. So I should mention that. So this is like my reference link that I use for myself. You could also refer your alternate accounts as well. If you're using a reference link, just make sure if you're multi-accounting, you're using, stuff like VPNs and, not highly connecting all the wallet addresses by sending funds between each other. Generally, if you keep the cluster of wallets, so like the connections of transactions between wallets under 7, or 5, you should be fine. It's when you're going to like 10, 20, 30 wallets that are all highly connected that you don't want to do. How do you not connect them to each other? You know, just either withdraw directly from a centralized exchange or bridge from a different EVM, a wallet basically. So a different type of wallet on Binance, AVAX, or Arbitrum, and bridge directly into a different Sol wallet and just don't highly connect them or whatnot. So when you do put in that referral link, it's gonna load you in here. You notice that the URL is the mfi.gg version of this site. There has been a few UI issues as well where, you know, people's balances aren't loading and whatnot when they go into the referral link and get redirected to the mfi.gg version of the site. If this happens to you, go to the alternate URL address, which is app.marginfi.com of the site. Both of these URLs are legitimate. Obviously, don't believe me, assume, you know, I'm malicious and trying to hack you or whatever. So always check with the project's Twitter, official Discords and whatnot. So if that does happen, use the other alternate MarginFi site and then disconnect and reconnect your wallet and refresh the page. And then you should have those issues resolved. Because basically once you'll do an initial transaction, create your account. And if you keep trying to deposit and creating accounts because the UI is messing up, you're going to be creating a bunch of accounts. And that will get confusing later on because you have to be able to pick the right account. There's a bunch of options here, right? So, you know, there are alternative liquid staking options where you can do loop strategies with MSOL and BSOL, but we'll save that for another time or a different video. So this one's just going to be strictly going over stablecoins as well. The reason we're doing stablecoins is it's less volatile. It's basically less likely for you to get liquidated unless there's a big major stablecoin you peg. And I'll go over the risks of these strategies kind of at the end of the video as well. So obviously you have to start by lending or supplying a certain asset. So we're going to be doing USDT. And because I haven't ever deposited on before, I have to create an account here. It costs about 0.016 Sol to create the account. Sometimes the UI will bug out trying to do this next part here, which is why I talked about that alternate URL fix strategy. And you aren't seeing my Phantom wallet appear right here when it's like prompting the transactions to show what it is. If people want to see that, I can, you know, put that in later or change the way the screen records for that. I don't see that as adding any benefit for now. So, okay, so we added our 100 USDT. So we can see on the bottom here, it's showing we're lending that. So now we're going to borrow, right? We don't want to borrow a different type of asset because it can potentially mess with our health factor. And I'll go over that as well. So we're going to be borrowing a stable coin of USDC. So we can see here that we can only borrow a max of 75 USDC. And that's basically the riskiest our health factor can go to. Generally, I like to do, you know, 10-ish% less than the maximum, just because you don't need to squeeze that much out of it, because it's just not really necessary. And it does provide, you know, a little bit of flexibility if, you know, to hedge a risk down the line, and you aren't, you know, really getting that many extra points for it. So the way the points work is you get 1 point for every dollar you're lending, but 4 points for every dollar you're borrowing, basically. Okay, cool. So as we can see here, you know, we've supplied roughly $100 of USDT, borrowed roughly $70 worth of USDC. It shows our health factor here at 22%. So basically the way health factors work is if the value of the assets you are borrowing exceeds the value of the assets you are lending or supplying by a certain amount, then what you are supplying will get liquidated in order to pay off what you are borrowing, basically. So this is why, you know, you don't want to go too risky on a health factor. The reason we're kind of being more aggressive with the health factor percentage here is because we are using stable coins for both supplying and borrowing, so they should stay stable, right? And then as we can see here, basically it gives kind of the calculation of what I just said here. And if this percentage reaches 0, then you will get liquidated for it. And we can see what we are lending and borrowing down here. And this is probably a good time to mention step.finance. So at app.step.finance, it's basically a dashboard that lets you see your positions in various DeFi protocols as well. So you can get a nice overview summary here in case, you know, the UI on MarginFi is not working and you're like, you know, what's happened to my money? Where is it? It does not cover everything though. Like for example, for the lending and borrowing on Camino, it does not show up on step.finance, at least for now. So because of reasons like that, I do recommend you keep notes like in a spreadsheet of kind of your positions and on what wallet, because especially if you're using multiple wallets, you are going to forget what positions are being held where on what wallet. So, and it will kind of save you a headache down the line instead of rifling through all the wallets and trying to remember what you did on what sites and whatnot. So we've done our lending and borrowing, and now, you know, we've borrowed USDT after supplying USDC. So we're going to go to another money market called Camino, which also has a strong chance of also doing an airdrop. And they do have a point system that is not released yet, but it should be applied retroactively, which means if you start, you know, supplying now, you should be getting compensated for that in the future. So because we borrowed that USDC, we are going to supply that now into Camino. And now that we've supplied that, we are going to borrow USDT now. And around the same thing, right? The way the health factor on Camino, it's the same thing, but the way they kind of show you and calculate it is a bit different. So I'm going to borrow, you know, 10% less of the max. And I am doing this on a burner hot wallet. I do recommend you use a ledger for all this stuff. Similar to the health factor here, on Camino, we're at 71%. The way they kind of calculate it is basically once you reach the max you can hit is 80, like normally. And then if you hit 85%, then you will get liquidated. Kind of similar to the health factor here. It's just the way they kind of display it is a bit different. So, and then what are these APYs? So basically you are provided a certain APY on the collateral you provide. So, you know, for on Camino here, it's showing for if we supply USDC, we get 4% in rewards per year. And usually this percentage is average on a weekly basis. And it shows here like 2% of that is actually in terms of bonk rewards. And then it's the similar thing on terms of the borrow side. So, you know, we're paying 2.83% to be able to borrow this asset. And this is the same thing on MarginFi as well. The APR for the borrow side is how much we're paying. The lending is how much we're getting. This isn't really relevant for us as much because this is on a yearly basis, and, you know, 5% isn't a huge amount, and it kind of gets evened out with how much we're getting paid on the for lending. So, and we're not going to be, you know, providing for an extremely long time. All right, so now that we have USDT again, after supplying USDC, what do? You could reloop it one more time, right? You could technically keep doing this as much as you want. You will kind of like hit a saturation point as well. So what would we do is we'd supply the USDC. Maybe you do 45 instead of 50. And then you're going to again borrow USD, and then you're going to borrow USDC again. And then you will have USDC, and then you're going to supply USDC again, and then borrow USDT, etc. So you can keep looping this. You could like stop after going through this one time and maybe not go through Camino again. And then like, what do you do with kind of like that extra stable coins at the end, right? There are some few options. You can park it in a Camino vault. So we can, you know, search here for just stable coin pools. You could just put it in the normal stable coin pool, so you're not subject to impermanent loss if it's paired with another volatile asset like Bonk or Sol. So this pool is just stable coins, and then it's just a way to get a bit of APY and like provide more liquidity, you know, and potentially get more points for Camino. Some other options is to also provide it into the stablecoin pool at Meteora. Apparently Meteora is also by the same team that did Jupiter Exchange, which is the best swap aggregator on Sol currently. And they are doing an airdrop. It has been announced. And by the way, if you're doing any type of swaps, you should just be doing it through Jupiter, because there is still 30% more of the airdrop supply yet to be allocated. 3 more phases of 10% chunks. So something you should be passively kind of going there. The minimum allocation or volume you kind of needed to push was like 1,000 USD worth over, you know, a few different unique months for consistency reasons. So yeah, that's another option there. Provide it into this pool to farm Meteora, which is by the Jupiter team. So they have a decent chance of doing an airdrop as well. And the other option is to go into Sega.fi and provide it into one of their vaults. Just make sure it's on Solana and it's a USDC vault. And then you can deposit the asset in here. They have around 9 million funding with only 8 million in TVL. So there's a decent chances for that as well. Basically, kind of read this to understand what you're doing. The vault does not technically open until the 14th. So if you put your funds in now, it's going to be kind of locked till the 14th until you can put it in. And then I'm not sure how long it's locked for. With the USDC, with this pooling here, you can withdraw it right away. So those are some options there. The other option is to also go on Parcel and deposit there. They have around 10 mil funding and only like 1.5 mil in TVL. This one's a bit different though. You can basically just become a liquidity provider and provide USDC into the pool there. Thing you should notice with this as well is that it is locked for 30 days if you do provide liquidity in there. So depending on your strategy or how flexible you are, you may or may not want to do that. Okay, so let's go over how do you unwind all this? How do you withdraw it all, right? Basically, to get back what you supplied originally, you need to pay off what you are borrowing against, right? So after our most recent interaction loop, we have 50 USDC in our wallet. So we need to repay what we are borrowing now in order to basically lower our health factor to a more reasonable level so that we can withdraw what we originally deposited. So if you're having like a UI error, it showed like, hey, I need to pay 49.999995. And it said I didn't have enough, but I deleted that very last 5, which is like, 1/10,000th of a cent. And then it was able to let me withdraw. So if you ever have an issue there, just fix it that way. So now we've repaid our 50 USDT. We now have a 0 balance in our wallet. But since we've repaid off our loan, we can withdraw the USDC we originally provided. You are basically doing everything in reverse that you just did initially to unloop the loop you've done. So now that we've withdrawn that 70 USDC we provided to Camino, we now have that in our wallet. So we can now repay the loan we've taken back on MarginFi so that we can get back out the original USDT we've lended. So it's a bit confusing. So it's a bit confusing initially. If you want to repay the loan, you have to go to the lending tab and then click what you borrowed to repay it. They have also added this nice UI at the bottom to kind of make it less confusing and easier to find. So we're just going to repay what we borrowed here. And if ever you're clicking the button here and this shows up and it's not popping up in your Phantom wallet, just refresh the website and try it again and it should pop up in your Phantom wallet. That does happen, fairly often actually. So great, we've repaid our loan. And now since we've repaid our loan, we can withdraw. But when I did do the withdrawal, it was 94.98 when I hit max. I think that's because it needs to leave a little bit for the collateral. And then I was able to withdraw the remaining $4. And then now I'm able to withdraw the remaining 23 cents that it lets me. So you may have to do it a few times, but thankfully the fees on Sol are extremely cheap. So it's essentially negligible. So as you can see, we have roughly 1 cent being provided right now. And you can't see my wallet, but it's 99.98 USDT, which is what we started out with. All right, so now that we've done through all that, what are the risks, right? So obviously there's risks with everything, right? So the number one risk, which is the most common and normal risk in everything, is smart contract risk. So, if MarginFi or Camino or Meteora or any of these DeFi protocols, like anything in DeFi, get exploited or hacked, you can potentially lose all your money, right? That's just a risk you have to deal with in crypto. Ideally, you supply your capital with, proven teams that have good security practices and audits and whatnot. And generally, if there's a strong amount of TVL, that instills that more people are more confident in that protocol. Having 240 million, 312 million being supplied here, is fairly large. MarginFi is probably the largest money market, lending market right now on Sol. So, it's as safe as it's probably going to get, at least currently. Other big risk, obviously, is if there's a severe depeg on one of the stable coins as well, right? So if you're supplying USDC and you're borrowing USDT, and there's a big depeg in USDC, and the value of your USDC all of a sudden becomes worth way less than $1 or USDT, then you could potentially get liquidated, right? What's the likelihood for that? How could that happen? Not sure. I don't even know how you could figure that out, but it has happened before on an ETH mainnet as well. So that's something to consider. And the other big risk is cross protocol risk. So because you're doing cross lending strategies between protocols, if something happens on Camino, you're not going to be able to pay off your debt to withdraw your money to be able to unwind what you've done on MarginFi unless you bring in more additional outside money to be able to pay off what you've borrowed here, right? So, you know, a way to hedge this would be to only do one protocol per wallet. For me, I don't see it as a huge risk to be doing it across, you know, 2 to 3 protocols as well with stable coins. But if you do want to hedge your risk, you know, it is better risk management technically to only lend and borrow specifically on one wallet, on one protocol, and just keep looping there instead of looping across protocols. You aren't going to get, you know, multiple drops per wallet potentially, but you are safer. You know, you could have 5 margin 5 wallets and only 5 Camino wallets, and then, you know, do that extra bit and deposit it into Meteora. It's up to you, right? Obviously not financial advice, XYZ, etc., but those are some things to consider. So yeah, hopefully that covered everything and answered all the questions. This video is very long, you know, it's about 23 minutes now. I'm going to try and cut it down at least 5 minutes, hopefully. And if you did make it this far, I appreciate your time. If you want to follow me, this is all based kind of on a thread or a long form tweet post I kind of did earlier. If you want to follow me, you can follow me on Twitter at info_insightful, where I kind of post more strategies and thoughts around airdrops mainly right now, but I also post about just Web3 projects in general, really deep in the Web3 gaming space as well. Just spent a lot of time there. I've learned a lot. So yeah, I would recommend coming over to my Twitter if you want to learn more, and stay tuned. And yeah, I appreciate your time. I hope you found this info insightful. I'll see you guys in the next one.